One of my favorite builds, the Fixit Felix build, that I also feel is pretty unique, is long overdue for an optimization, especially with all the new gear and weapon changes since I first put it out. Let's tear this build up and use its core concepts to come up with even better results.
Hey agents, it's Dispatch. Welcome to the channel where we talk about the math, builds, lore, and game design of Tom Clancy's The Division 2. Let's get stuck into it.
We're going to change this from a striker build in a minute. I know, I'm tired of striker builds. It seems like, especially these days, everyone is doing striker builds, so they've gotten pretty stale. It's hard to escape the meta, but we're going to try today. And on that note, this isn't your usual boring meta build. I really feel like I had a unique philosophy with this build, and it's that philosophy that we're going to keep pushing forward in this video. The idea is balancing damage with self-heals. My original build was 4-piece striker with the backpack, a fender's chest with kinetic momentum, and a piece of Cheshka. All the minor attributes were repair skills, and all the gear mods were incoming repairs. The weapon of choice was the mechanical animal, and the skills were the fixer drone and mender seeker. The strength of this build comes through its high repair without sacrificing core attributes. We get skill tiers, repair skills, incoming repairs, and total repair skills that all multiply together to give us roughly 30% repair a second without any skill interaction required. All we need to do is focus on shooting and reloading. We don't need to drop a camera trap at any point, and we don't need to manage our skill health. Even though shields are definitely the meta right now, this build does have some minor advantages that might suit your style better. You have to be close to cover more so than a shield, but these skills really protect you from all directions, not just the front. These skills allow you to use LMGs, which recently got a buff, so it's possible you could get higher DPS. We'll go over a comparable shield build later in the video. What's changed since we first put this build out? Well, Fenris was never a great choice, and expertise has lessened its impact even more. We weren't going for crit on this build, but even then, scraping up some more crit would have made a big difference. So a Cheshka chest with Coyote's mask would be the most efficient setup. Unfortunately, even now, I don't have a Cheshka chest with kinetic momentum. More countdown runs in my future. The mechanical animal got a buff now. It gives another skill tier over normal future perfect. If you wanted to change some cores over to skill tier, you could even hit overcharge pretty easy with this build, though overcharge isn't that great with these two skills. As Dodd pointed out in the last video, skill tier repair skills in the stat sheet are multiplicative with our minor attribute repair skills, as well as the incoming repairs mods. Now the SIG certainly isn't the top of the DPS charts, but you can substitute pretty much any weapon with future perfect if you wanted to. One important thing that I pointed out in the last video that most others don't is that you can use a number of different weapons for stacking striker, not just the ACS-12. The Vector with Unwavering is a particularly good choice, as is an LMG with Frenzy. I already talked about a lot of the other ways it could be changed in the previous video, such as swapping out various talents and minor attributes to get the exact balance of repairs and damage that you want. My philosophy has always been finding efficiencies. If you need to balance multiple stats, what's the best way to get the most out of those stats with the slots that we have? So let's talk about how we would rebuild this today with all the new changes. In the interest of maybe doing a bit more damage and balancing the build out a bit more, we could go with Coyote's mask instead of Cheshka. Alternatively, we could run Dodge City Gunslinger's holster plus the Orbit named pistol, and that gives us a huge amount of crit, though we need to be really on top of keeping that buff up. We do lose 2 minor attributes to headshot damage and weapon handling. Though these can help us, it's still not ideal compared to all the crits. If we were using the Coyotes with the long range buff, we're getting 4% critical hit chance and 28% critical hit damage more with the Orbit if we can keep it up. We're definitely losing some uptime with our primary weapon, so I personally don't think this is a good trade, but definitely try things out and see what works for you. The extra crit would be especially helpful if we were running something like the blue screen LMG, which is one of my favorites, but it has absolutely no crit stats on it. Also, we could just run our bog standard St. Elmo's, which comes with a bunch of crit on it, basically solving this problem for us. So let's compare this with an all-red striker build. With St. Elmo's and the Coyote's Mask with the mid-range buff, we're at 62% critical hit chance, so a bit over-spec'd. The game only shows and uses 60%. Our critical hit damage on the all-red build is 183% and our weapon damage is 130%. Let's look at the worst case, whereas our hybrid build, we're dropping 3 mods and 3 minor attributes and 2 weapon damage cores. That means our hybrid build is at 111% critical hit damage and 100% weapon damage. We'll look at the HTK and TTK for these builds at max stacks, and then we'll see what it looks like if we are able to add 2 more critical hit damage mods for 135%. Let's consult the Blake tool, link in the description. Alright, so here we have the average TTKs for each build I ran through our simulator. Keep in mind that each firing interval is about 0.06 of a second. So we're talking single bullet differences in some of these cases, like with our standard red DPS build here on the left, compared to the same build with 26 weapon expertise on the right. 26% added weapon damage on top of the weapon damage we already have isn't moving the needle in most cases. We do have a loss of 1 or 2 bullets on a red, depending on the amount of crit damage we're packing. If you're doing missions or open world content, the vast majority of enemies are reds. If you're doing control points and facing those waves that are trying to retake the control point, or you're doing countdown, that's where you'll face a ton of elites. As we can see, the difference in damage starts to pile up a bit on our hybrid, so we're definitely seeing some losses here, out to a quarter of a second or even a bit more. Keep in mind that a quarter of a second is only 4 hits in this instance. Keep in mind also that stagger lasts about 1.5 seconds. So if you're in a dangerous spot with an enemy right in your face, as long as you have enough rounds left in your mag and you can hit your shots, you should be able to kill the enemy within the stagger window with any of these builds once we reach max stacks. Getting to that point where the stagger is triggered in the first place will depend on the enemy type, but considering how quickly we can kill, it would only take about a third this time at most to trigger the stagger. So worst case, we're looking at about 0.4 seconds to trigger against an elite. This is very doable and shouldn't introduce us to enough damage to knock us down. Even if we do take a couple of shots, that's what the repair is for. We can also notice that expertise doesn't necessarily always have an impact on our TTK, but if we want to use a hybrid and swap off some weapon cores, expertise does a lot of work bringing our damage back up and can be very valuable. I like this build a lot. To me it feels very good and makes the game pretty easy for open world and heroic missions. Doing 212,000 heals without the 3 skill tiers, and then once we get 3 skill tiers from Future Perfect, we're bringing it up to 340,000 heals. So about 44% of our armor per second. Nutty. So how are we going to evolve this build? Well, we know that there are other repair skills out there that we can use. The Reinforcer Chem Launcher and Restorer Hive generally have more healing power than the Drone and Seeker, for the trade-off of more management required. We can see from the base stat sheet that we're getting way more repair. If we drop the Hive in a Chem, we're doing about 386,000 healing base and 528,000 when Future Perfect is procced, and not having to wait for kinetic momentum to fully activate. We can do even more by dropping a second Chem. This will take us away from doing damage to manage it, but that extra healing can definitely be worth it. Now, since these are both charge-based skills, this makes things a bit more complicated than our first build. Our first build didn't really need any skill tiers because Future Perfect took care of that, and it just increased our healing output directly, health and duration of our skills, which we mostly didn't need, at least not immediately. For the Chem and Hive, however, since they are charge-based, we need skill tiers to get the proper amount of charges. We could also spec into skill haste, as that will make our charges come back faster. The Chem can also greatly benefit from duration increase on the Cloud. We're only going to focus on repair skills and skill tiers, as those apply to both skills, and we have enough charges to last through any engagement. Future Perfect has an interesting interaction with charge-based skills. Each kill brings up the skill tier, which increases the number of charges we get. However, we don't get those charges immediately. They have to recharge per our skill haste. So we need to keep the Future Perfect buff up to keep those extra charges. Because we need those extra skill tiers, we drop 2 weapon damage cores for skill tiers. Switching over to Technician instead of Survivalist gives us a little bit of repair skills and a skill tier. The biggest win of this new build is that we can put Obliterate on our chest. Kinetic momentum is extremely efficient for the slot, but when we already have more heals than it would give us otherwise anyway, more damage in the slot is more efficient than damage elsewhere. The lost weapon damage cores would give us about 15% multiplicative damage, even less if we have expertise. In return, we're getting 25% multiplicative damage that granted needs to build up, but also with more healing. Now as far as this build plays, as I said, it requires more management. The Hive has a nice ability that you can pick it up and not lose any charges. If you destroy it, you'll lose all of them. This can make you a bit more stationary, but it also has a pretty big radius, meaning you get more freedom to move around in that radius, where the Fixer and Mender won't be able to keep up. The Fixer and Mender allow you to go cover to cover and run around fairly freely. You just won't necessarily get healed until you stop. With the Hive, you'll have to put it down and then pick it up again. When moving cover to cover, you can drop a chem in the middle of the animation and time it so that your agent drops it right as you reach the next cover location with essentially no deployment downtime. Massive, please. In the next game, let us aim and deploy skills with our offhand so we can keep shooting at the same time. Thank you. Another big benefit of these skills is that they are much better for team heals. You can see how much instant healing our chem is doing. That's almost a full heal for a no blue build. And we're still doing tons of DPS. The final big benefit is that if we're using a Future Perfect weapon with 3 skill tiers, or the mechanical animal with 2 skill tiers, we can access the ridiculously powerful overcharge for these skills. Overcharge for the Mender and the Fixer is pretty underwhelming. Look at this chem overcharge though. That radius is massive. And yes, I didn't misspeak here. The mechanical animal will add 4 skill tiers. Once you get to 6 skill tiers, a kill at that point will trigger an overcharge. So 2 base skill tiers plus 4 skill tiers will put you at 6, and then the next kill will trigger overcharge. Normal Future Perfect will require 3 skill tiers base by the same process. This build allows us to do some off heals for our team, sacrificing 72% crit damage. It sounds like a lot, but you can tune it down, drop 2 incoming repairs mods, and bring it down to 48% critical hit damage loss, which is basically the killer talent being procced or not. Not a huge deal considering how much repair we can do. If playing in a group, consider using the Striker's Chest. Since enemies are a lot more tanky, it should be a bit easier to build those stacks. Playing solo, I really struggle to get those, so definitely be mindful of how many you're able to get. This setup has a higher damage ceiling and would be easier to farm. Unfortunately, once again, I don't have any good weapons with Future Perfect, particularly LMGs. Honestly, I don't like using any LMGs except for the blue screen. The handling penalties and suppression still drive me nuts. The blue screen's accuracy shrinks down basically after the first bullet. With this build, we're able to activate blue screen's talent whenever we want. We can reload, pop a chem, then blaze down all the enemies exposed by the talent. We can also consider maybe changing out our coyotes for the ultimate solo exotic gear piece, the Memento. Not only does it give us a bit more soak with an armor core, it gives us a skill tier, bonus armor, 30% weapon damage to make up for our missing weapon damage cores, and a massive amount of skill efficiency. Remember that skill efficiency gives us repair skills, good, skill haste, good, and skill duration, good. Now losing out on big damage bonus from the Striker backpack is quite a loss, but it provides a lot of benefits for a hybrid like this. The Striker backpack gives approximately 21% more multiplicative damage at max stacks. The Memento gives us a weapon damage core and 2 more at max stacks for a total of 3, or 45% weapon damage. That equals a 22.5% multiplicative damage increase, less with expertise on our weapon. With this version, we're dropping 10% repair skills, since we're relying on memento stacks to give it to us, but we also get 3% armor regen and that extra armor core. The real downside comes with losing our crit. While we can supplement the lost crit chance with our 2 freed up repair skills minors, it still isn't enough to compensate for the 10% critical hit chance and 10% critical hit damage that Coyotes would give us with the mid-range buff, and especially not enough to match the most efficient long-range Coyotes buff. Not to mention it's going to take a lot longer to get to max memento stacks than, well, striker stacks. In my opinion, stick with the striker backpack and the Coyotes mask. So let's now move beyond striker, which is boring. Negotiators is my favorite version of this build. It gives us a lot of crit that we've been missing. This helps us a lot, especially with the blue screen. Negotiator's talent is very powerful, just a little harder to manage than striker. It requires, at times, exposing ourselves more to ensure that we always have maximum marks, and that might entail taking more damage. A striker build can isolate one enemy using cover and laser that enemy down, but Negotiators doesn't have that same 1v1 power. It does, however, have immediate damage, especially at the start of an engagement when you can mark multiple enemies quickly without too much trouble. Other gear sets are definitely valuable as well, such as Umbra, but that already provides some self-heals through its talent. A high-end build could also be very potent, as you have a lot of extra minor attributes to switch to repair skills, since we'll already potentially be over-spec'd on crit. 2 pieces of Brazos will give us skill haste and skill tier, which both help us immensely, and the Picaro's holster makes up for a lost weapon damage core. This build will be a rough one to farm for, however, so be warned. There are lots of options here, so let's narrow things down a bit for analysis. First thing I noticed with a high-end build was that our backpack talent options aren't very good, especially for this type of build. We're counting on taking damage, so Vigilance seems like a poor choice. Companion would be a solid choice. In this instance, however, Memento seems to gain an advantage since it has that 22.5% multiplicative damage, which is definitely more when we need Coyote's crit even less than before. However, if we're going this route, we don't want to use too many named pieces, as then we're losing our crits, and then Coyotes would be better. If we're using an LMG, Contractors is a no-brainer. Same goes for Foxes with the rifle setup. We can also throw on another piece of Petrov for weapon handling, which is critical for LMGs. For our remaining brand bonuses, Palisades would be a good choice, especially if we can get to the extra skill tier at the end. So basically, we're looking for some good pieces of a combination of Foxes, Contractors, Picaros, Palisades, Grupo, Cheska, and even going Providence. Our exotic options are still pretty much the same with Memento, Dodge City Gunslinger's Holster, or Coyotes. The best case probably for this high-end version is running a rifle, if rifles work for you. For me, they feel pretty bad still, even after Project Resolve, but maybe that's just me. There are lots of interesting rifle sets that can get you upfront damage. We can use Foxes, 2-piece Zoo, including the Eagle's Grasp, Cheshka, Grupo, and one of the exotics, or throw in Picaros and another piece of Brazos. For marksman rifles, we already covered that in another video. For SMGs and shotguns, if you're getting this close to the enemy, you'll need the extra soak and mobility of a shield. These repair skills probably won't work for you. Speaking of shields, I said I'd compare the repair at the beginning of the video, so now let's take a look at that. Putting a shield on an all-red build makes a ton of sense, because it almost triples your effective armor pool, even at 0 skill tiers. Adding a single shield tier brings that shield health up by 38% and is the most efficient shield health increase. So let's say we stick with the current build setup of 3 repair skills attributes and 3 skill tiers, 1 from Technician and the Artificer Hive from Technician. We can swap the incoming repairs that was doing nothing for our shield to more repair skills attributes, so we get 6 repair skills attributes for 120%. Our shield now has about 2.7 million health, or about 3.5 times our armor pool. So if we wanted to get that amount of armor on our self-repair build, we just can't. There aren't enough armor cores possible to get that kind of armor. That's a pretty big advantage right off the rip. Granted, we can repair that amount in about 8 seconds, but let's look further. The shield does almost
58,000 repair on its own. The Artificer repairs 75% of our shield health every 10 seconds, which equates to just over 205,000. Unfortunately, somehow I don't have 3 repair skills mods. It's embarrassing. So with that, it can go even higher. So total we have about 262,000 repairs on our shield. We can see here that the shield is, as it said many times, very overpowered. It's quite the crutch, though it doesn't scale as well as I expect when increasing shield tiers. Its true power lies when you're just getting that first skill tier and that big shield health buff, and after that it tapers off, which is kind of the opposite of what it should be. Don't forget to take into account that with this build, each future perfect proc will get us a lot of repair and shield health, and on overcharge, the shield is invincible. Literally invincible. Massive. I know it'll be super unpopular, but please, nerf the skill, or at least in the next game, have it scale in a sensible way that makes sense. This is ridiculous. Alright, so there you have it, agents. If you want to try something new, interesting, and fun, try one of the many options we discussed in this video. Tune the build to suit your taste. Personally, I really like the autonomous nature of the Fixer Drone and Mender Seeker. I think, though, I'll be switching over to the Chem and Hive. I'm wondering if we should call this the Fixit Felix 2.0 build, or should we call it the Wreck-It Ralph build, or maybe something else entirely, like the Rocky build, since we can tank a bunch of damage and not go down, while still being able to dish it right back out. Either way, I think I'll be running this new build with Negotiators, Coyotes, and an LMG, something that feels way different than the Elmo Striker Shield builds we've all been running the past couple months. Now's the time for you all to let me know of the obvious mistakes that I made and anything that I didn't include. Are any of you going to farm some new pieces or recalibrate a piece or two to repair skills to give these builds a try? How are you going to run it? Let me know down in the comments. Hit that thumbs up because, let's be honest, if you made it this far, you like the video. It only takes a couple of milliseconds to hit the like and subscribe, and it helps me immensely. If you hated the video, tell me why, and hit the dislike. That'll be all, agents. Once again, this has been Dispatch. Take care out there.